You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
So all the nobles are in town to escape because they were fearful for their lives. So you got all of these rulers in town. Perfect for a party, right? The leadership is nervous, obviously so. You got enemy at the gate, literally at the gate. And by the way, there's also this bias against foreign gods. And they don't want anything to do with Yahweh. Because after all, look what he did 20 years ago to Nebuchadnezzar. There's this problem.
The Bible is full of true stories from thousands of years ago that are movie-worthy. In today's message, Pastor Ken will bring to life in amazing detail the account of the fall of Babylon. Babylon was a great pagan city that had conquered many nations, but it made the mistake of challenging the God of the universe, Yahweh. It's a story that includes amazing feat of military strategy, and not to mention supernatural manifestations that will leave you wowed. You don't want to miss this powerful account. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Daniel, chapter 5, as he continues his message, The Fall of Babylon.
Nabonidus had a problem. He worshiped the god Sin. Great name, right? This god was not a Babylonian god. It was a god that lived in Saudi Arabia. So he spent a lot of his time south in Saudi Arabia rebuilding altars that belonged to the god Sin. Today you know him by a different name, Allah. But anyway, that's what his name was then. And he was rebuilding all of his altars. Well, he wasn't home when these events take place in chapter 5. His son was ruler in his place. So he's the second ruler in the kingdom. Nabonidus had a history of not being there, especially at New Year's. And when it was customary for the king to participate in traditional rites, he wasn't there. He didn't want to take part in it because he didn't worship those gods. The absences were so frequent and long-lasting that his son is now in control. He was not exactly a really good king, especially when a guy by the name of Gubaru, here's a great name to be a commander, he's the commander of the Persian army, and he's working for a guy by the name of Cyrus, and he shows up outside the walls of Babylon and beats the Babylonians, and they all come back inside. So Belshazzar has already lost a battle to Gubaru. Now it says Belshazzar apparently died shortly after the conflict. Yeah, no, he was by the Persians. And Nabonidus was captured and then paroled. But Cyrus, 2 weeks after all this, marched in the city and took over. And we'll find later that a guy by the name of Daniel meets Cyrus when he comes in and reveals to him something written in the book of Isaiah several hundred years before, where Cyrus is named by name by God. We'll cover that when we get to it. The Bible, though, doesn't reference anybody by the name of Nabonidus. It's not in the Scriptures. But it's in the context of this section of Scripture when we see the author of the third ruler, okay? So it's Nabonidus, Belshazzar, and eventually Daniel. But it was real. You know, Belshazzar is the co-regent with his dad. He's the second. Now, we also know, because of other discoveries, and this is the Nabonidus cylinder, there's actually on this a prayer for Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar. So we know that exists. And this is how they would write things. If they were going to send a letter out, they'd write it on a cylinder, and you could take a piece of wet clay and roll it on it, and then you'd be able to read it. So that was their messenger service at the time. But that's one of 4 cylinders that they found at a ziggurat south of Babylon in 1854. They only recently translated it. But there were 4 of them, one at each corner, and they all said the same thing. I guess it was, the blessing on the ziggurat or something, I don't know. But there was one on each one, because he rebuilt it between 555 and 539 BC, somewhere during that time period. Now, Babylon is a great big place. And I want to give you kind of an outline from Herodotus as to what it looked like at this time. So you can kind of get a sense of what's about to happen here in the text. So I'm looking at other historical sources. The Bible doesn't tell you much about how big the city is, But Herodotus does. He was there, and he gives us some background. Babylon was a city such as I now describe it. It lies in a great plain. It's in a shape of a square. Each side is 15 miles in length. This is in a time period where the average town was 10 acres. This is a big place. 60 miles make the complete circuit of the city. So if you rode the top of the walls, it was a 60-mile ride. Such is the size of the city of Babylon. And it was planned like no other city, which we know. Remember, that was one of the things that Nebuchadnezzar was good at. He was an architect. Around it runs a moat, deep and wide, full of water, and a wall 83 feet thick and 333 feet high. Okay? This is a big wall. They wanted to make sure nobody could get in. The royal measure is greater by 3 fingers' breadth than the common measure. So I must also relate where the earth was used as it was dug from the moat and how the wall was constructed. As they dug the moat, they made the bricks of the earth, which was carried out of the place they dug, and when they had molded bricks enough, they baked them in ovens. Ovens, right there near anyway. And using hot bitumen for cement, because they kept having this black pitch come up out of the ground all the time. That's why they have oil wells all over there now. But it was just coming up out of the ground. And they used it for cement, interposing layers of wattled reeds at every 30th course of bricks. And they built the first border of the moat and then the wall itself in the same fashion. On the top, along the edges of the wall, they built houses of a single room facing each other with space enough between to drive a 4-horse chariot. This is a big wall, okay? There are 100 gates in the circuit of the wall, all of bronze, with posts and lintels of the same. There's another city called Is. 8 days' journey from Babylon, where there's a little river also named Is. It's a tributary of the Euphrates River. From the source of this river, many lumps of bitumen rise with the water, and from there the bitumen was brought for the wall of Babylon. Thus, then, this wall was built. The city's divided into 2 parts, for it's cut in half by the Euphrates, a wide, deep, and swift river flowing from Armenia and issuing into the Red Sea. The angles of the wall, then, on either side are built quite down to the river, where they, in turn, and from here, a fence of baked bricks runs along each bank of the stream. The city itself is full of houses 3 and 4 stories high. This is not a small town. And the ways that traverse it, those that run crossways towards the river, and the rest are all straight. Further at the end of each road, there is a gate in the riverside fence, 1 gate for each alley. These gates were also of bronze, and these 2 opened on the river. These walls are the city's outer armor. Within them is another encircling wall, nearly as strong as the other, but narrower, and in the middle, 1 division of the city stands, the royal palace, surrounded by a high and strong wall. That's by an eyewitness. Herodotus was actually there, and he saw it. So what he's describing is this. This is Babylon. This is the Babylon he's describing. It's a square. You see the river going through it. You see the moat going around it. You see the king's palace right in the center of it, right next to the ziggurat at Temenaki, which is sitting on the remains of another ziggurat that some guy named Nimrod built. But that's the town. That's what Babylon looked like, the one that was described by Herodotus. Now, does it look like that today? No, not quite. The palace of Nebuchadnezzar was rebuilt by a guy named Saddam Hussein, and the bricks, each brick said Nebuchadnezzar on it. Well, now they say Nebuchadnezzar and Saddam Hussein. But he did rebuild it. Now, the thing that you have to understand is that's the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. In the background, you see a huge building. That's Saddam Hussein's house, one of them, much bigger than Nebuchadnezzar's palace. But he was intending to rebuild the entire town. He started down that path. So as we enter chapter 5, here's the picture. This is the political picture, the socio-economic picture, the religious picture. I want to make sure we understand the whole background behind it. Daniel's in forced retirement. He's in his 80s. There's been political turmoil for 20 years. Who's on first? Who's the king today? Don't know. Let's kill him. Let's get a new one. That's what they've been doing. Now remember, God said Nebuchadnezzar was the head of gold, and after that, the kingdom was over with. Well, it's pretty much over with when you can't keep a king in power. So you've got this problem. Nabonidus, the current king, is more interested in building temples to non-Chaldean gods, and he's not there. He's busy doing other things. Belshazzar is second in command, and by the way, he's also Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, okay? Possibly, but when you start studying it, it looks like he really is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. The scriptures say the son of Nebuchadnezzar. That's because there's no term in Aramaic or in Hebrew at that time for grandson. Didn't exist, so they call him the son of. By the way, and they have lost a battle already to the Medes and the Persians, so they've already lost and have had to retreat into the gates, and they're under siege. So the Persian army has surrounded all of Babylon. But Babylon has enough material and food to last 20 years. All right, fine. Place is under siege. You'll be dead before you win. That was their attitude. They think they're secure. Okay? But there's this river going through town. It's very high. It's very tough to cross. You'll get killed doing so. By the way, the only part of Babylon that still belongs to Babylon is Babylon. So all the nobles are in town to escape because they were fearful for their lives. So you got all of these rulers in town. Perfect for a party, right? The leadership is nervous. Obviously so. You got enemy at the gate, literally at the gate. And by the way, there's also this bias against foreign gods. And they don't want anything to do with Yahweh. Because after all, look what he did 20 years ago to Nebuchadnezzar. There's this problem. So now, about the forced retirement. During that time period, in the quarter of a century between chapter 4 and chapter 5, Daniel has received further revelations. We'll get to them, but during that time period, he gets the revelations of chapter 7 and chapter 8. Chapter 7 was revealed to Daniel in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. And the vision of the ram and the he-goat in chapter 8 occur in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. So he's already, while he's retired, he's getting visions from God. He's a busy man. The information in these two visions, as much as Daniel understood it, is known to Daniel before chapter 5 ever happens. He knows this. So Daniel chapter 5 chronologically happens after 7 and 8, but it's not arranged that way. So you just kind of have to remember that, because we have history in the first 5, and then we have the visions. But chronologically, 5 should be 9, or actually it would be 8, if you move 7 and 8 to forward, ahead of 6. Jeremiah 51:24, an important verse to remember. I will repay Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea before your very eyes for all the evil they've done in Zion, declares the Lord. God means what he says, and he's about to do that here in chapter 5. And he says he's going to show that to the people of Israel. So what happens? Xenophon, who is another historian of this time period, writes a bit about the battle that takes place leading to the conquering of Babylon. So they're digging ditches, and you wonder, why are they digging ditches anyway? What Xenophon says is the ditches were complete, and then when the king of Persia, Gubaru, and Cyrus heard that a certain festival had come around in Babylon, during which all Babylon was accustomed to drink and revel all night long, Cyrus took a large number of men, just as soon as it was dark, opened up the heads of the trenches at the river, and as soon as it was done, the waters flowed through the ditches in the night, and the bed of the river where it traversed the city became passable for the men. He diverted the Euphrates River. Okay? Not a, yeah, you can't conquer us. Yeah, okay, I'll just divert the river and then walk in. That's what Xenophon tells us. Now, this is the background for this banquet that's going on. So they're having a banquet. They're busy getting drunk. Cyrus is just outside of town, diverting the river. The river is already beginning to drop, and now we're going to have these events take place. So this is what's happening here. Daniel 5, verses 1 to 4. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a really bad thing. I would put it on a rank of 1 to 10 in terms of 10 being incredibly, incredibly stupid. He's an 11. Okay? This is, the feast is, he's basically saying, forget what's going on outside. We got food, we're good for 20 years, let's have a party. All of his nobles are kind of like, hey, well, we're afraid for our lives. Oh, don't worry about it. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we'll die. Yeah, they did die the next day, in fact. And Xenophon also relates that the guards on the wall around Babylon actually laughed at the army of the Persians. It was dark. They didn't know that the river was dropping. They just knew a bunch of them retreated. They didn't know where. But hey, so here's Belshazzar sitting on his throne with 1,000 nobles and their female companions. Now, this is unusual. Normally, they don't do that. The king normally doesn't drink with others. He usually does it alone. And they normally never have women come to the party. But they did. And they're drinking toasts to pagan gods. So it's beneath the dignity of Middle Eastern kings. They don't do this. So he's already violated that. And they normally didn't have the women come in either. He violated that too. It was always private. It was not a public spectacle. He was not supposed to do that. Now, thanks to the Babylonian Chronicle, which is another document we saw a picture of that several weeks ago. It's another document from Babylon. The date of Belshazzar's feast can be determined with a high degree of precision. In other words, we know the date. The Chronicle states that on the 16th day of the month Tishri in Nabonidus' 17th year, Saturday, October 12th, 539 BC, the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without a battle. So we're talking about events that take place on the evening of October 11th and in the morning of October 12th, 539 BC. So now you can wow your friends and neighbors at parties and say, I know, anyway. But that's the date that is actually in that cylinder. So in Daniel 1, if you remember, we saw a refusal by these 4 young men to eat the king's food. And in chapter 4, we saw a king humbled in eating a diet of grass. Now we see a king using food to control his nervous rulers. They're getting drunk. Let's just be honest about it. They're having a party, and the intent is to get them hammered. That's what the king wants to do. He wants them to forget what's going on outside. And the party is all about praising the gods of Babylon. Now, Belshazzar is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. He was there, and he saw his granddad go crazy. And he saw his granddad regain his wisdom and his knowledge. And he saw him and heard him give praise to Yahweh. He knows all of that. He's rejected it. Totally rejected it. But he knows all of this. So what he's doing, he can't say, I didn't know. He knew. He absolutely knew. So in his drunken stupor, he is mad at what happened to his granddad. He's mad at Yahweh. He's mad at everything. So he's tempted to express, because he's drunk, his anger and do something that he probably shouldn't do. And as many people do when they've had too much to drink, he goes ahead and does it anyhow. The foreign god that captured the heart of his grandfather and corrupted the court, he's going to take care of. That's what his decision is. So he does something that no one else ever did. None of the kings before him did this. He calls for the vessels that are in the storehouse that were captured and brought from the temple. He's going to show the gods of Babylon are superior to all foreign gods, even Yahweh, in opposition to what his grandfather had said. So this is his goal. This is what he's trying to do. The real reason that he's doing this is with the God for whose glory these items that they're drinking from have been made. He knew about Nebuchadnezzar's supernatural experiences. He knew about the God who stood behind the vessels. He knew what happened to Nebuchadnezzar and that Nebuchadnezzar worshiped Yahweh. And yet he rejected it. And he's rejected it so much to the point now that in his alcohol-encouraged state, he's going to blaspheme God. Not a good thing to be doing. By the way, there's actually an atheist today who has what he's published calls the Blasphemy Challenge. He'll give a person a free book of his if they'll go and record them blaspheming the Holy Spirit and then send him the video. 27 people have taken him up on it so far. Pray for them, okay? Really. But that is stuff that's going on today. So back to Babylon. The site of the rebellion in Genesis 11. Okay, remember, that's what happened here. And I made that point. Timonaki was on the grounds of another ziggurat that was built by a guy by the name of Nimrod. This is where this all happened. And we have a king now who's not learned the lesson learned by his granddad. And he's taking the ultimate next step of not only using the vessels dedicated to Yahweh and the service in the temple, but he's going to toast fallen divine beings with implements designed to worship Yahweh. Nothing is sacred to this guy. Nothing. And he wants to draw his inner circle and have them do the same thing that he is doing. Isn't that interesting? He's going to do this, and he wants everybody else to participate in this with him under threat of death. So here we are in the middle of this party, and there are women there too. It's a violation of normal things, and we have an appearance of the supernatural. Verse 5. So they're drinking, they're doing all this stuff. And on the wall, immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared. And I desperately want it to be the sound of fingernails on a chalkboard. Okay? That's what I wish. It doesn't say that, but in my mind's eye, I'm kind of like, I'll get your attention. Especially when you consider that the walls were covered with lime and they didn't have paint. So here this hand shows up and is writing on it. So it could be that. Let's go with that. So this human hand appears and writes on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. So here's the lampstand. This way everybody can see this hand write it. And the king saw the hand as he wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. We're going to go into the Aramaic of this, because as we study it, I get chuckles. His limbs gave way, and that's not the only thing that did, and his knees knocked together. Okay, so he goes from being this brazen, drunk fool to he's sober. Boy, is he sober. The king, by the way, when he saw this hand, those fingers that he sees are the same ones that the last time they wrote on a stone tablet, and they wrote the 10 Commandments. It's the same hand. Okay? And by the way, here it is, Exodus 31:18. And he gave to Moses, when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, the 2 tablets of the testimony, tablets of stone, written with the finger of God. Same finger, okay? So if he can write in stone, he can write on a line-covered wall. And since Yahweh is a spirit, this visible manifestation of Yahweh, the fingers, is most likely the...
You've been listening to a message about the inspiring book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Pastor Ken has been diving deep into this book here on the Unsafe Bible. Something that stands out repeatedly is that Daniel went through many trials by fire, showing his faith in the midst of being in exile and an enemy to those who didn't fear God. But every time God came through for him, proving that standing up for your faith brings honor and blessings that can't be attained by the ways of this world. Have you had situations like Daniel's, where you've gotten in trouble for proclaiming Jesus as your Savior? The cost of worldly demise is worth it in staying true to God. It's no easy path to take, but Daniel's example is a stellar one to follow. Do you have any questions about what you heard today? If so, don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch with us by going to theunsafebible.com. Once there, go to the Connect tab and click on Connect Card. There, you can fill out a form for us to get in touch with you. To listen to this message or any others from this series in Daniel, just look under the Media tab at theunsafebible.com. You'll also find additional teachings in other books of the Bible. If you found this ministry to be a blessing as you've been listening, you have the opportunity to help invest in the Unsafe Bible ministry by checking out the Give tab. We're grateful for any donation given to help further the message of the gospel. That website again is theunsafebible.com. Join us again for another edition of the Unsafe Bible.